Welcome to our last online coffee of the year. I'm Brian Walter. Kim and Polly are with me. We're the college counseling team. If you haven't met us yet, Monica Silvan, who's here next to me off screen, is the fourth member of our team. I hope those of you who will be returning as parents next year, so those of you who are 9th, 10th, 11th grade parents, that will actually be in person next year for our coffees. But I think these have worked out pretty well. And again, we try to put all of our coffees on our website. If you want to take the time to go back and get more information than you already did through the live one. So we'll be posting this one as soon as we can get it sort of edited. But what I thought I would do first is just kind of go through, give you a sort of a lay of the land in the national landscape with college and college admissions world, and then talk about where each grade is right now. And then we're going to open it up to Q&A. You can use the Q&A feature. I think that's probably what we would prefer. But so obviously, I think many people know that last year saw sort of an explosion in college applications we had never seen before. A lot of that was related to the COVID created test optional dynamic. And I think this year what we're seeing is on top of that, another sort of increase, which is hard to believe, of sort of many different kinds of schools. But just to give you sort of a sense of what we're seeing, the Common App has released a total number of applications that students have submitted, which if you like big numbers, so there's 1,106,000 kids have applied to 853 colleges this year, and that's up 13% from last year. So just on a national level, more kids are applying to more colleges, but last year was up 22% from the previous year. So again, on top of a year that saw a huge increase, it's again going up. So that's just sort of on the macro level. We don't have a lot of the data from schools yet, have not released their total applicant sort of totals for this year, but the UCs have. And just to give you an idea of UCLA, which gets, I think it's the most applications in the country, received almost 150,000 applications. UC Berkeley was 128,000. Most of the sort of 40 to 50 most highly selected schools are up, not as much as they were last year when many of them were up 30, 40, 50%, but they're still up to some degree. So again, it's on top of a huge surge last year. Where we're seeing the biggest increases this year is sort of these very coveted schools that have historically not been quite as selective. So University of Pittsburgh, Wisconsin, Auburn, University of Tampa, these schools are seeing 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 more applications, which right in front of our eyes shifts a school's academic profile that they're looking for. It makes it very frustrating for those of us who's, are working with students, that in 1 year, a student might go from admit getting merit scholarships to being denied the next year. And no one would have any idea that that would have occurred. So that's what is happening this year with so again, these coveted, I would say also in the South, any sort of larger, medium to large Southern school are pretty hot. And the one group of schools that I would say are not so hot in terms of application numbers are, again, the smaller arts colleges, maybe Midwest, Northeast. That's not every one of them, but just generally that's what we're seeing. More and more test optional applicants as well. So more kids are applying test optional, more schools. With the reality and the sort of bounce back of that is that more schools are reporting higher test scores than ever before because kids with lower scores aren't reporting them. So you'll see, it seems like every school, the mid 50% range for an ACT is 31 to 33 or higher. So that's kind of the reality of the test optional pieces. The scores are also inflated. I think grades have been inflated because of COVID. So there's a lot going on. But just to take a breath and remind you guys that this senior class, almost every student has at least one home. And we're tracking towards our typical number of about the low 90% of students getting one of their two top choice schools. So even in this kind of madness where it keeps the college admissions landscape almost shifts right in front of our eyes, 2 years in a row, our kids are still finding great homes. So that's kind of the main takeaway I want to give you. For junior parents who are here, we're obviously, our eyes have turned to our juniors. We're meeting with, I think we've met with almost all of our students, and now we're well into the family meetings. And I think just a reminder about those meetings, our job is to make sure we sit and hear all the factors for any given family or student and make sure we're doing our best to give you a list of schools and an initial list that reflects the reality of what we're seeing out there. we are by nature conservative and we're not dream crushers, but I think when we give you a list of schools that might not be what you thought your son or daughter or your child was going to have, that's because we're seeing the data that's out there. So again, we want our students to shoot for their dream schools, but also see the reality of what's going on at, not just, again, the sort of 30, 40 most selected schools, but that next sort of group down as well. Just a reminder again for students and for parents, many schools are now tracking how students engage in their sort of digital recruitment worlds, in addition to campus visits, which I think many of you will be able to do, which is great. Schools really are tracking, in addition to that, how students engage in their digital world. So what are they looking at when they're on their websites? Are they opening emails? It doesn't mean that students should be going onto a website 30 times over the next year, but it's just a reminder that schools now, there's no going back. So COVID opened this new door, this new portal with which schools can offer more authentic access to their faculty and students. And in their opinion, provide a great sort of visit experience. And so they're sort of now using both the personal visit and that digital offering. And just, we've been telling our students in college class. So again, students are in college class and we're reminding them of that. But just as you guys move forward over the next 5 to 6 months and you're visiting schools, it's just a reminder that there's the other side as well. But in those college classes for juniors, we'll be working with them on their writing, some mock interviews, essays. Again, just kind of getting a little more micro with them right now. And really, I mean, they're in these college meetings, so I think they're starting to sort of connect a little more. With 10th graders right now, they do have a college counselor assigned. The students have access to Naviance, and that's where the counselor is listed. If your child can show you that assignment. We really don't meet with sophomores yet, except for in the next few weeks about course selection. If they have a question about, do I take a language junior year? There's not a whole lot of wiggle room rising juniors have, so we don't really meet with the majority of sophomores. But if your sophomore has a question, they do have a counselor assigned to them. And then 9th graders, we did meet with 9th graders in December just to say hello in their advisory. We showed them a transcript. We talked to them about, planting seeds now for sort of their non-academic path. And again, just not waiting till junior or senior year to get involved. I mean, those among many other things. But the biggest news, I think, for 9th grade parents and something to be aware of is the SAT, or the College Board, as you may have heard, announced that they will be going to a digital SAT in the spring of 2024. So the reason I bring it up for 9th grade parents is because for sophomore and juniors, you're going to be done the college process when that test sort of jumps on the landscape. The test is going to be shorter. It's going to be section adaptive. It's still scored out of 1600. There's a lot of details that I think we're going to be finding out over the next few years, and obviously we'll be sharing that with you. But I just wanted to mention it. And also, when you got the Zoom link for this session, there was a reminder about the session that Compass, who's a really knowledgeable test prep company they did a talk, I think it was last year as well, for the local Philadelphia area independent schools then it was just about test optional. And this year it's specifically about the new test. That's going to be on March 15th. I'm going to put the Zoom link in the chat, but it's also in the email you received about this coffee. And again, if you want to really get into the nitty gritty about this, this new upcoming test, Maddie Steiner, he's the lead of Compass, is really good at sort of unpacking the details and the stats. I would encourage you to go to that talk. And again, we're on the early stages of this, but it's clearly College Board's attempt to kind of adjust to COVID, to the reality, to their test being too long to a lot of things. But just wanted to mention that. And at this point, I'm going to open it up to see if folks have any questions. So again, you can use the Q&A feature and just whatever's on your mind, we're happy to answer. All right. It looks like somebody has raised their hand, but you can also just type in a question as well, just because I can't see you. So I appreciate you raising your hand, but you can just type it in. There we go. All right. Yeah, so the section adaptive, from what I understand, this is kind of like the GREs, if any of you took them, where I believe it adjusts to if a student's getting this percentage right, percentage of questions right in the first section, the second question becomes tougher or becomes easier based off how you're doing in the first section. So it's adjusting to how the student's answering as it goes. Their thought is that's going to give you a more accurate score. I don't know. And honestly, I'm not an expert in testing to explain it to you more than that, but that's the difference, is that versus the test just being the test, it's now going to be adjusting based off how the student's answering correctly or not, and what type of questions they're answering correctly or not. What else? What else is on your mind, folks? So there's a question about so the junior parent night, we have been trying, and obviously playing the COVID game, to bring reps on campus for our case study night. And in January, we sort of we were kind of overmatched with COVID numbers. And even when we thought we might be able to do it again a month later, it was still a little dicey. So we are working on that date, and we will be offering that program. We're just doing our best to actually have it live. And I think we're now approaching a time period where that's going to be realistic. And that's really why we pushed it back. So obviously we hope we can give enough programming via these coffees and other things. But we'll be rescheduling that, and we'll be letting you know as soon as we have that booked.
Brian, can I add to what you just said?
Sure.
Just to jump in on what exactly the case study program entails. We basically show families 3 fictitious applicants, their whole applications, including their essays, and then teacher letters, counselor letter. And then with actual college admissions reps, families have an opportunity to talk about those applications and figure out which applications are the strongest. And this is an exercise that we did do with junior students already this year. So you can ask your child about how that went during college class.
So there's a question about what is the testing timeline for sophomores? When do we sign up for the ACT, SAT? And I mean, there's no one timeline for testing, but sophomores should not be taking an SAT unless there's a really specific reason, which you'd have to convince me of. It could be, I guess I could see potentially athletics, but the typical student sort of timeline for a first actual test would be, the most common first test for students is December, February, March, April of their junior year. So one of the 2 tests in that time period. Some students might want to take it earlier in the fall for juniors, but you have to sort of go back and then say, okay, how am I going to prepare 6 to 8 weeks leading up to that? So there might be some students preparing in Thanksgiving time period for a December test or a February test, but a lot of students, the bulk of our students, I would say, take their first test February, March, April, May. Especially now with test option, I think people are sort of taking a step back, probably healthily taking a step back, although the test score may or may not matter for any given student. But what we've seen is that's the most common first test is in probably second semester of junior year. When do writing workshops begin for rising juniors? I don't know if you're referring to, I mean, the college classes begin right away for juniors next year. So in September, students will be in college class where we do writing with them. We offer writing workshops this summer for rising seniors about the essay specifically. But the class for juniors starts in September. Okay, I'm trying to toggle back and forth between chat and Q&A here. So what are strategies for kids who might be concerned about getting accepted and may downgrade their expectations? Well, that's a healthy question. And I think obviously we're here to, again, give the lay of the land, give the data, give the actual real data that we have, not what's reported nationally or at a school. I think it's healthy for students to have the reality check that their dream school that has a 4% admit rate, a 6% admit rate, a sub 15% admit rate, they might not get into, no matter what they have. I think that's just the reality of getting into those sort of 30 to 40 most highly selected, 50 schools at this point. That doesn't mean they shouldn't still have those schools on their radar, but I think realizing how many great schools are out there is really what we're going to be sort of pushing for students in the junior meetings, and as we work with kids over the next 5 to 6 months, our rising seniors. And I just think that obviously part of that is accepting sort of our advice, and then embracing the fact that, there might be a school that you thought wasn't sort of in your orbit, but you go and visit and say, it's okay that I go to a school that doesn't have a 6% admit rate. An admit rate and a student's experience at the school, there's no correlation between that. And we've actually found many of our students, or a good handful, who don't even want to pursue that world. They're looking for schools that are a good fit for them financially, academically, mental health wise. And some students want to pursue the most selective schools. I mean, we have a whole mix, and that's where you work with your counselor and adjust for each student and their family. I don't know if you guys have anything to add, but that's kind of it's a tough question to answer, because we obviously have a lot of kids who are concerned because they hear what's going on, and they're seeing, the senior class, they talk nationally. It's like, this student didn't get into this school. I can't believe this. I mean, all the stuff that's out there. I think, unfortunately, sometimes it gets out of control, the messaging, but I would say try to shut off the noise and work with us, and realize that there's a great world out there beyond just the sort of schools you might have only ever thought you were going to go to. I mean, that's one way to put it. The time frame for a senior to determine the school they are attending. So schools are going to release decisions at all points of the year based off how a student applies, but students have until May 1st of their senior year to actually commit to a school, unless they're early decision binding, which is a whole separate category where you're sort of committing. If you get in there early decision, you're going to that school. But students who are not doing early decision binding have until May 1st to actually commit. So here's a question about, when do you recommend that rising juniors should take a course? Is the summer before 11th grade too soon? It depends on the student. That's a little early. If the student's ready and they want to take an October SAT and they want to spend August doing test prep, I mean, I wouldn't say that's the wrong strategy, but certainly I think most students wait a little longer than the summer. There's not a right answer to that. I think it really comes down to the bandwidth your child has, how much they're willing to put in, because there's no point in taking a test in that early in your junior year unless you're ready for it. And really, some students, even having half of junior year, might help them get a better score. So I never tell students to rush it. And prepping in the summer before junior year, there's some test prep places that, push for that. But just a reminder, you don't even have to do test prep. Khan Academy has free test prep. It's online. So that's for the SAT, just to throw that out there. And not every student does test prep. All right, looks like I have questions in Q&A too, so I'll try to. Oh, so there's a question about so 10th graders were assigned their college counselor. So that's, your child has access to that. And if you want access to that, you can email Monica, or you can email any of us, but if you want to email Monica, she can give you access to Naviance, but your child has access to that assignment. Did you see a continued trend of not submitting test scores for this past year, or are things trending back to pre-COVID trends of always submitting scores? I don't think we're ever going back to pre-COVID for the testing process in terms of what schools want. I think that what schools are going to be doing is examining how the students do who are admitted without scores over the next 3 to 4 years. So some of we have to see how students do. Schools are going to want to study that. But what's happening is, actually, I was at a meeting last week with our colleagues at schools from Delaware, New Jersey, New York, and Sean Abbott, who's the dean from Temple, who's been at all kinds of schools. He was previously at NYU. He's been a college counselor. Basically said that the test optional dynamic is like crack cocaine for enrollment managers because applications are just soaring because of the test optional movement. That's a big part of it. So schools are never going to go back because simply they saw what happens. The more access, more students want to apply, and that's what they want. They want more apps. And I think it's also an issue of access. And I think it's going to be hard for a school to walk back access in a different way for schools to walk that back. But in any given situation, for any given student, what it means about being test optional or not is where we come into play, and it's case by case. And I think that's where sort of what we tell students is, look, take the test, take one of the tests at least once, if not twice, doing your best, and let's see how you do, because we're not going to know for sure if you might need your score or not, or if the school you want being test optional is going to be in your best interest or not. There are still many schools who are going back to requiring the test, but the majority are going to stay as test optional. Should we be exposing rising sophomores to start looking at least local schools, maybe visiting campuses? Yes. I don't know if yes, any way that a student can see a campus where you don't have to make an effort to get out, taking a 4-hour flight. We have the wide range within 30 minutes of here. You've got urban, selective, urban, highly selective, small liberal arts, medium-sized suburban, specialty schools. I mean, you've got it all within 30 to 40 minutes. So any way that a student who may not really be thinking about this could actually get on a campus is, I think, healthy. There's another question about test optional, which is, again, a very tricky predicting who should be test optional, who's getting in test optional. Schools are not releasing beyond a certain level information about test optional. I mean, we can all probably figure out a lot of reasons why they're not doing that. The answer is there's no way to know on any given school for each student their percentage chances getting a test optional versus submitting a score. By and large, if you have a test score that is well below the mid 50% range for what a school posts, you probably shouldn't be submitting it, but it's not always that simple. None of us, there is no magic formula to say, okay, these 70 schools, at this certain point, you don't submit your score. It's case by case, school by school. If your student has taken one of the tests in February, when should they plan to take their second test? Any of you guys want to answer that?
Sure, I can answer that. In general, we want juniors to test twice in their junior year. So the ACT is offered again in April and June, I believe. And the SAT is offered in May and June of this year. And so we would encourage anyone who's already taken their first test to be thinking about late spring for that second test. And then most of our kids actually do test a third time, either during the summer before their senior year or right at the beginning of senior year.
Kim, there's a question about the junior parent perspective. You want to answer that one? She's just asking when should they fill it out, which sort of is as soon as possible, but I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that one.
Hold on. I had to get my unmute. It was hidden under my questions. So yeah, so the junior person, we said in our initial letter to all of the junior parents that before the meeting that we have with you, we would really like to have that perspective done because it helps us gain some more information going into the junior meeting. So if at all possible, getting that perspective done before our meeting is preferred.
There's a question about this. Does the PSAT still exist? Yes. And if so, what grades take it? For us, we have our sophomores and juniors take it. I will say that the PSAT is also changing, and I believe it's changing earlier than the actual SAT to the digital side. So we'll let you know how that's going to change. I don't think next year it will change, but the year after. But yes, we still do have our sophomores and juniors take the PSAT. And again, that score is really a practice test. For the sophomores, it's a practice for a practice. And for the juniors, that's who it's geared towards. The only thing that really comes officially from the junior PSAT is the national merit process, which you have to score in the top 3% of the state to qualify for, roughly. So really, again, it's just giving you another data point. But, with the junior PSATs, kids are probably going to be taking the actual SAT or ACT within 2 or 3 months. So it's a little bit more of, we want our students to be ready for it. But we don't make our students take it. There's some kids who may have started down the ACT track and just don't want to take the PSAT. Most of our kids do take it, and we recommend taking it, but sophomores and juniors do take it. Let me make sure I didn't miss anybody here. Let's see. Oh, I'm going to put in the chat the Zoom link for the March 15th test program if you want. Again, you had it on the email that was sent, but just it's in the chat if you want to register for that. And Maddie is a really good speaker. Last year, he gave a really impressive display of just stats, and he's really good with breaking down the numbers. And he actually talks about test optional versus not as well. Anyway, it's just Maddie's stuff. If you really want to hear about testing, he's a great guy to listen to. So the question is to slow down. Must mean we're answering everything really efficiently. What else? Any other questions? And just again, for rising senior parents, colleges will be visiting us again next year. Probably almost all in person, my guess is, but we'll still have a few that chime in on Zoom. So that'll be another way that students can meet with the reps from the schools. That's in like mid-September to early November. What else? Polly, do you have any updates, just a reminder for parents about the sort of accommodations world, just as I think it's always good to just mention it for those, especially ninth grade parents?
Yeah. So one of my roles in the college counseling office is to oversee the procurement of accommodations on standardized tests for students who have official accommodations plans here at SCH. And those plans usually, but don't always translate into accommodations on standardized tests. So as Leslie Fry gives me accommodations plans, I reach out to families to let them know that I've seen the plan and to kind of start the process of talking about applying for accommodations on standardized tests. So I initiate that process, but if your child has an OAP and you haven't heard from me, please reach out to me and we can talk.
I see a good question here that's since future college admissions will focus less on test scores, or it looks like that's where we're going. Which areas will admissions committees look to? Internships, writing samples, students. So what other factors I think you're saying are going to be more looked at? Should students focus more on finding a summer internship that suits their passion? No question that the rigor of a student's academic course load, their focus, their academic focus, and their sort of work ethic, story, narrative, grit, all those things are weighing more, certainly for any student who doesn't submit a score, but I think even for students who do submit scores, all those factors are more in play. It doesn't mean that it's going to overcome a student who doesn't have the basic sort of GPA to get into a school, but all those pieces, the messages we're getting from schools is those things are certainly more important. Although again, it depends on any given applicant at any given school. But I do think I would love to say, don't waste your time on test prep. Go have an amazing summer experience. Take a language program at Middlebury. Like that would be great. I think the score unfortunately still remains as a factor, and the trick is you're not going to know that early whether what schools they're necessarily going to want, and whether a score may or may not help them. So I wish we could go back and say, okay, all freshmen, don't worry about the score, but it really takes a little bit of time before we know for sure what schools, really move the meter for a student. And, but there's no question that schools are certainly looking at, I would say, academic focus at the most selective schools, the sharpness of a student's, the authentic passion and sharpness of a student's commitment to an academic area has become even more impactful in what we're seeing in decisions. So, the all-rounder and the sort of kid who has 5 different areas they excel in, those kids are still finding success, but I do think a student who really is taking a deep dive into the things they love, in some way, that's the message we're getting from schools, is that those students almost to some degree can fare better. And there's no one type fits all answer to that, but those things are all certainly playing a role more for schools. Schools are saying they play more of a role too. I mean, if you go to schools, they're going to say, yeah, supply test optional. It's not held against you. And, we'd like to believe that's the case. But again, that's the conversation with each college counselor for that specific student.
And I just want to add to what Brian said. I want to name the tension between academic rigor and mental health, which I think has become increasingly at the fore over the past 2 years with COVID as a factor in students' mental health. We are seeing our students just have it kind of beleaguered, to be honest, and feeling more stress around academics than I've ever seen in my 26, 27 years as an educator. So I think, those most elite, the 4%, 5% admit rate colleges are expecting students to have 4 to 5 AP classes their senior year. And students might not really be able to do that with the current mental health crisis among teens. So it's a tension. It's an individual conversation with one's college counselor, but I think it really needs to be explored, especially as juniors are thinking about what classes they're going to take their senior year.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point Polly brings up. I wish I could say that this process serves kids well, but no matter what schools are telling you, this isn't about students' health. It's about their numbers and want to get their best class. And it's challenging. There's competing forces, and a student who wants that world of schools, but is taking that kind of course load the right thing for the student. And it can be really tricky. And I think schools are unfortunately, that's not their job to sort of worry about students' mental health. It should be, but what we're seeing is they're giving these messages, kind of mixed messages to kids. You better take this course load, but your test doesn't matter. I mean, it's a very complicated message, I think, that especially the highly selectives give to students. And like Polly said, I mean, we're seeing more and more students. I mean, certainly it's COVID related, my guess is, but some of we were seeing it before COVID too. And there's a question again about the sophomore assignment. So we don't really pump out the sophomore college counseling assignments just because, sorry, did I just switch off here? Am I on screen?
You're good. We can
That
see.
was weird. Okay, okay. Sorry about that. So the college counseling assignments are made internally in Naviance. Most sophomores really haven't been on Naviance yet, so that's why they're not on MySCH. So again, if your child wants access to see who their counselor is, it's in their Naviance, which they have access to. We also can send you as a parent your link as well. So that assignment is there. You can also email us and we can tell you who their or Monica is happy to tell you who your college counselor is. Okay. Looks like I'm checking both the chat and Q&A. Looks like I think we hit all the questions. So it's 8:50. Unless there's any last questions, I guess we'll end this coffee. Again, we'll post this recording on our website. I encourage you to come out the 15th if you want to learn more, especially 9th grade parents. And again, we'll let you guys know as soon as we booked our case study evening. And thank you for spending some time with us this morning. And have a great day.